So, gentlemen, all together against corruption.
Agreed.
Thank you very much. And we start on the note of the Afrobarometer report. That is a very credible report that's been so consistent since 1999. Great. So, where do we go from here? That most of us Ghanaians feel or think that corruption, the level somewhat, is worsening, or a lot has worsened a lot over the period. My guest on Newsfile this morning, Abdul Malik Wekubako, editor-in-chief of the New Crusading Guide newspaper. Dr. Kojo Pumpuni Asante is Director, Advocacy and Policy Engagement, CDD Ghana. Kofi Bento, Senior Vice President of Imani Africa. And Suleiman Abrahima is Executive Director, Media Foundation for West Africa. Gentlemen, good morning and welcome to Newsfile.
Good morning. Good morning.
Right. So let's say this is the anti-corruption edition, of course, in the week that is dedicated to creating awareness about corruption. And on Monday, the International Day Against Corruption will be observed. So, but before we go into this corruption, let's check if there's some corruption in the agriculture sector. Yesterday was Farmers' Day, and I just got a message from a brother who is in the village, Ayimbila Atera. He says that he was voted the best farmer in our district. Congratulations to you. So what do you have to say about Farmers' Day?
It's still relevant, and at least once a year we are reminded that more than 50% of our people are dependent on farming. It also reminds some of us about a number of things, that today we are importing more food than we've ever imported. I was speaking to some people, we were speaking on the cocoa industry. Imani did a very big research on cocoa industry. And I was making the point that of all the things that we've come through as a country, we were Gold Coast, we know we have timber, etc. It's farming that has made people rich. Cocoa farmers used to be rich. Farmers used to be rich. Today, if you hear cocoa farmer, you expect to see a poor person. Farming used to make people rich. Today, not so much. Too many of our farmers are poor, struggling, semi-literate and aged. And we need to focus on them. If you take what you eat in a day, chances are about 50% of it is imported.
Or more.
Or more. So for those of us who have to analyze a bit, you have a situation where farming still remains important, but we are importing more. The farmers are not getting what they should be getting. We are not feeding a country which has a lot of land, etc.
Right.
Something is wrong with our agricultural policy.
Okay.
So this occasion, forces us to reflect on some of those things. I think it comes down to leadership. We must really take a hard look at how we can bring young, educated people into farming.
All right. Thank you very much. And Suleiman, the president has joined the campaign, and he says his wife served him local, rice, and invites everybody to take that example. So that's how we start, right?
Well, I think it's a commendable initiative. I think the campaign has been on for a few weeks now. And I must say that as a son of peasant farmers, both my father and mother are peasant farmers. I grew up farming. For the better part of my life, I was a farmer.
In your backyard.
And yes, and so I understand what it means when we talk about, agriculture and farming. I think what is sometimes disappointing for me as a farmer and somebody, as somebody who grew out of farming, is the fact that you have governments quite often celebrating when prices are so low. And the question I often ask is, do we think about the farmers who are producing these produce, that we say, well, we are doing well today. When you go to places like Afrobarometer, you use plantain to beat people, and governments would celebrate that. And the question is, the people who toil, who sweat to produce that, do we care about them? Right. And I think that it's all about the policies that we have to ensure that, yes, food prices shouldn't be so astronomical, but it shouldn't also be at a level that disadvantage the people who sweat to produce that. So on the occasion of Farmers' Day yesterday, I think that, as Kofi has said, it's a great thing that we must continue to celebrate our farmers, But at the same time, we must also endeavor to put in the right policies that would, benefit our farmers.
It's encouraging, isn't it, that we hear government talk about a number of things that it is doing, the planting for food and jobs project, the irrigation programs, dams around the place, and also creating markets within, these rural communities so that they can feed industries with the produce that is within the area. Their confit, juice factory is one of that. The president just inaugurated the multi-purpose dam in Polugu. So we're on the right track, or we are too used to these things. They never amount to much.
Well, good morning, Samson, and let me first of all use the opportunity to pay tribute to one of our colleagues who passed yesterday, Mr. Kofi Okansi-Blanson, a real true patriot, somebody who has inspired all of us to aspire to the new Ghana that we want. And I think that that's the legacy he left us, and we would do our best to continue to fight for that Ghana.
I'm actually waiting for us to finish, and then we'll make a comment about that. Of course, not he alone, and also Ayuba of the Electoral Commission, solid communicator.
May their soul rest in peace.
Right. The reason I'm in black.
Yeah. On the Farmers' Day, I think we can do a lot with the Farmers' Day. There's a lot happening in the agric sector. If you recall some years ago when Mr. Bartels announced a policy where they were trying to get MPs and so on to go, the government was going to procure land banks and so on for kind of, let's say, political elites and other elites to get into farm, because we have been trying hard to move the agriculture from its subsistence level to more commercial, and I think they had borrowed it from Cote d'Ivoire and so on. That didn't materialize, but the answer had always been if the middle class who have capital could get into agric and commercialize it more, that would improve the lives of peasant farmers as well, and so on. And I think that is beginning to happen, but it's still very much in a very haphazard way. So I know a lot of people in the banking, the services sector, who are using their extra income to do farming. You have a whole cadre of farm managers, young people now. That is a whole new sort of job prospect for people. And if you go to the agri-technology side, all of the innovation hubs that you have and so on, there's so many stuff that is happening. I think the Farmers' Day can begin to be used to harness that and tell us about our progress. If, for example, we want to increase local production, or we want to encourage people to eat more locally produced goods, on Farmers' Day, we should know how far we have progressed on that. So the metrics that tracks over the year, how we have been doing on rice, on plantain, on this, on that, and so on. And it's not that it all have to go and be read at the Farmers' Day, but in the run-up to that, all of these kinds of statistics, because we have to find a way to transition. And it has to be coordinated, and I think Farmers' Day provides. So I, for example, want to hear an award for agric innovation, young, people who are doing different things. That helps us move us to that transition. So I hope that, in the future, maybe we can,
Thank you.
do more of that.
Yes, Kuku?
Need I say more? I'm not too sure. Everything has been said. But one good thing, lasting legacy, I think the PNDC left was this one. Apart from its symbolism, it has a psychological boosting effect. But as has been indicated here, we need to go beyond that. Industrialize, modernize agriculture, open up the credit space for them. But this is one good sustainable legacy, just like the Islamic holidays thing. It reconciles the nation, it boosts our confidence, and brings us together.
We set up an agric development bank, which there are complaints is not exactly developing agric.
I didn't hear you. Can you repeat it?
All right. Okay, so at the end of this program, I have a comment or two to make about those gentlemen who unfortunately passed on yesterday, and I'm sure my guests will also have something to say about them, because they have in no mean way contributed to our public discourse and shaping national, debates. So we start with you, because CDD is the lead organization for Afrobarometer here in Ghana. So 53% say corruption is somewhat or a lot worse. How do we tell that this perception is not wrong perception in the first place?
Well, it's a very important question, and I think also we have to put it in a bigger context. If you track, for example, the Corruption Perception Index that is put out by Transparency International and GII here in Ghana, since it started, and I think probably that goes back to early 2000s or so, we've not hit a 50% mark or 50% score, like a half, pass mark since that time. We've always averagely hovered around 40 plus, right? That says something about our efforts to fight corruption, because it means that from the public's point of view, the perception or how they perceive corruption has been constant. It's constantly high. All right. Now, the current perception statistics, you have to also put it in context. So if you go back to 2014, which was round 6 of the survey, it was 83% of people who felt corruption had increased, right? And actually, the 2014 was a really poor, it was one of the worst valuations that we have gotten in the Afrobarometer. Everything, all the indices were very, very poor. And so from 2014, then we had 2017, when the new government had just come in. So we collected that data in September of 2017. So Nana Akufo-Addo's government had just come in. The expectations were very high. There was the promise of the OSP, the promise of if you want to do business, you shouldn't come into my government.
There was a promise that there'll be a lot of savings on corruption.
There was the savings
because projects were overpriced and so on, and there was a lot of corruption.
The pronouncements and everything was, and then people were quite optimistic about that.
There was actually the refrain that we're not broke because we could get a lot of money from, stop them from the corrupt activities. Let's listen to the research analyst at your end, CDD, Newton Noville, who spoke about this briefly, and then we'll return to Kojo Asante.
We don't push out all the findings from the 100 questions to the public. So we put them into thematic areas. And so somewhere last week or last 2 weeks, there was one on the economic conditions.
So wait to say that answer, the results for that will come out?
Will come out.
When?
It will come out.
I want to see it now. I want to see it now.
So that
no, but timing is everything.
Yes.
If you wait till election year and release that, you're in trouble. Because that has a potential of influencing. And the reason why you held on to it, nobody knows. I mean, after tonight that they know that it's there, you'll be getting calls tomorrow.
I can give a teaser, but then...
Give me a teaser.
So the findings does not put any of the political parties in a position to win election. That is 50 plus 1 vote.
But the NDC,
None of the political parties
is ahead, isn't it?
That is a question again that I will not answer.
No, but that is very instructive.
All right, so that's just to tell you that the survey cuts across various aspects of the economy and the Ghanaian society. Part of the survey results show that neither the NPP or the NDC will make a one-touch victory in 2020. Part of the survey also says that the vigilante party, political party vigilantes, because of whom we have had meetings and had fights and had, you know, all sorts of things done, passed the law, are still around. Nothing has happened. Yeah. Okay, that would be a different research.
It's a different research.
Okay. So
reports, yeah.
there are various aspects of the report.
Yeah.
It is not just about corruption, but in fact, it is focused on corruption.
It's 100 questions.
100 questions.
And it covers everything from social issues. Even the one we released on corruption also has evaluations on public services.
Right.
How government is doing on various public services.
So you took us to 2014 round 7
on
or so.
On the level of corruption, whether corruption has gotten worse. So 83%, and then it goes down to 39%.
Wow.
So the aspiration of the public that what they were hearing, the kind of moves that were being made, it clearly signaled a period where there's a lot of optimism. It's a drastic drop. And then it goes up to 53% after a 2-year period. So, I mean, I put that 39% to basically a more aspirational sort of verdict on the new government that had come in, and the current to the more aspirational, the experience having the government sort of undertaking certain initiatives. So it kind of reflects what they have experienced so far under the current government. But for me, as I said, all of it still boils down to the bigger picture, that I think we are struggling to make quite a radical move on tackling corruption. And the fact, so in a way you can feel like it's some sort of a stagnation, right? And we have to ask ourselves some very hard questions. Okay, we know the kind of interventions government have put in place, OSP, the attempt to address procurement, reducing sole sourcing, making restricted tendering, all of those kinds of things. Trying to resource both the investigative and the prosecutorial bodies. How do we measure, if we are dealing with the graft? How are we able to measure our progress?
So what's the story? If in the midst of all these that you are talking about, that the government has tried to do OSP, and I don't forget also the RTI, and then you are talking about several other things, and yet in the midst of all of that, it gets this bad.
So RTI it's not operational until January 2020, but you would expect that would give people a lift, right? I think you have to look at the OSP as symbolic. So for me, if by now Mr. Amidu's office had even sort of done some prosecution or whatever, it could have affected the way people see government performance in that, in that. Because, and for me, a lot of the corruption is too pervasive. Every weather surveys, both in terms of people experiencing corruption, it's pervasive. Petty corruption, grand corruption, it's a huge problem. But when you have a huge problem like that, you cannot tackle everything. It is really about signaling. You are signaling to people that there is a new type of order. And they have to see it. So one of the things that I've commented on, for example, is police bribery. I don't understand why no government or even IGP has managed to sort of nip this in the bud. It's the first sort of point of call for a lot of citizens when they are interacting with public officials. that is symbolic. If that was reduced, I can anticipate that if you were to do a survey the next time, people would begin to say something about whether they feel corruption is reduced or not. So that lack of signaling is a big problem for me.
And when we talk about corruption from the UN's perspective and a broader look at corruption, we talk about a range of transactions which include extortion, bribery, embezzlement, nepotism, payment of facilitation fees, abuse of discretion, conflict of interest, and so on. There's been a lot of talk about nepotism, for example, in this regime. Could that also have fed into this perception index?
I don't think, because actually all the survey, if you do a survey about what people understand to be corruption, nepotism doesn't fall into it. Even facilitation fees sometimes are not considered as corruption by the public. Most people consider corruption to be bribery, you know, actual exchange of money. And I think in some ways that's probably where the police becomes, you know, a target, or the courts, particularly with services. So, and that itself is an area that we have to work on. But if you and the other GIS surveys have shown, even NCC surveys have shown that very clearly. I think for me is that, you see, people have to feel when you've had a system like we have in terms of people experiencing a lot of extortions of money in the hospital and this and that. What is going to convince them that things have changed? Either those things stop, or they actually see people being prosecuted in a way that sort of they think, oh yeah, this government is really serious. So we've had prosecutions. There's the opening prosecution that's on there. There's, I think, Maslot, and then the NCA cases that are going on. One other thing that I think people, once it gets to court, it's also, it gets technical, so people cannot really follow what's going on. But I feel that it's, in terms of signaling, that is another area where you have to be able to project that people are properly being prosecuted. It's one of the reasons why I feel that the Shraj stopping their public hearings around corruption is a bad thing. Because, you see, the public have to see accountability being, being pursued. They have to have a way of seeing it. Losing all of those things does not help.
But when you said, like, facilitation fees, for example, people don't see that as corruption.
Yes.
And yet, particularly when they interface with public service, mostly what they are doing, I thought they understood that to be facilitation fee, that you must bring something so I can do the job for you. And where they even bring in the judiciary and all of these other places, my suspicion is that that is the only thing they would have done to say that is corruption.
Yeah.
So that must be serious enough.
Yeah.
It leads me to ask a question. If 53% say corruption is somewhat or a lot worse today, and yet in the same survey, corruption is not their major concern or the issue that they require to be addressed. They begin talking about roads, infrastructure.
Yeah, education.
Corruption is rather the eighth major problem.
Yeah.
I did a comparison with Spain.
Yeah.
In 2016, they were ranked corruption was ranked the biggest problem. It was behind unemployment in Spain. Now, this was essentially political corruption because corruption among the civil service was said to be low. Spain, were 58th on the Transparency International rankings in 2015. And yet, corruption was seen as the second biggest to be resolved.
No, I don't think you even have to go to Spain to sort of draw analogies, because, I mean, as for surveys, when you ask 100 questions, there are so many answers that looks contradictory. I mean, there are techniques to try to reconcile them and understand, like trust ratings. So, do you feel that there is corruption in the presidency and its appointees? You get a certain number. Do you trust the president? Yes. you see it as contradictory. But it could be that people are making a distinction between the president and his appointees, or that even though they feel that, oh, this is going on, this individual, they still trust him. So it's not too far-fetched. I think that nobody should look at that 8th position and say, oh, corruption is not important. Because, you see, when you ask people...
But that's what the results should be telling us.
No, well, I mean, in terms of, from a policy point of view.
If you say it's getting worse, a lot worse, and then you make it the 8th of your problems to be resolved.
Well, that's why it's important, I mean, for me as a researcher, when you have all of these questions, there's so many things. When you go and do the demographic breakdown, one of the consistent patterns in all of the questions around corruption is that young people are more likely to rate the government poorly. People who are more educated, post-secondary, are likely to rate the government poorly. And people who are poor are more likely to rate the government poorly. So there are patterns, and that's all important for policy policy analysis and response.
Okay.
So for me, you see, what will happen, and we're going to be doing a pre-election survey next year, and I'm sure this matter will come up again, and we'll see where corruption, is rated. But if you ask people about is the connection between corruption and development.
Let me go around and then return, because today we are discussing corruption, Afrobarometer, and the aborted referendum. I suppose that can take a small of our, just a bit of our time when we are closing. And this is the main and most important thing. And to those complaining about the YouTube stream, the show is streaming on the Multi-TV World page on YouTube. So you can watch from there. Thank you very much. So, Kofi, okay, so what do you make of this survey, these results?
They're interesting, but because you've made it the main subject, let's take our time and go around it. We need to note in the first place that perceptions of corruption over time become cultural. People's perceptions have some cultural, roots and links. What they claim perception is, or corruption is, or what it is not. Now, it's interesting that it came out that facilitation is not seen as corruption.
Not in this survey. I was referring to
different
surveys that have been done that even.
But it's true here.
Yeah.
And that's where it seeps into our culture. You have a situation now where people see facilitation as helping them. It reflects a total a feeling that the system cannot work unless you have somebody who helps you through it. To that extent, therefore, they see the guy facilitating for which they have to pay as somebody helping them. It's become a cultural phenomenon. So that's one thing, and we need to break that, because people need to have some confidence that the system can work, which is why I'm happy with what you're doing with the passport office, etc., where you can see that really things work, DVLA, etc., and we need that in other places. Then here's something else I'd like us to look at, especially in the context of Ghana and what you're doing. There is a marked difference between what offends people and what affects them. And for me, that's the heart of the matter. Are people offended by corruption, or what we define as corruption, what you just defined as corruption? And does it affect them? I wish to submit that today in this country...
The UN says we should define corruption as misuse of entrusted power for private gain.
Yes.
So that it catches every situation.
Does that offend the average Ghanaian? And I submit that the average Ghanaian is stressed to the point where if the thing does not affect him or her, he doesn't care anymore. People are trying to get by, all right? To that extent, therefore, it may be corruption, and you see, that's why the police keep coming up. Okay, you get arrested, he is affected by the action of that policeman. But when somebody, we've almost forgotten about Uyomi. When somebody steals $1 million, when somebody does all those things, does it affect him? again, they feel so distant from that arrangement that they don't feel affected by it, and so they don't care.
That's why they make it the 8th of their biggest headaches.
Exactly.
I think you are.
Okay.
He's understanding me.
Sorry. I asked this same question to HKC Prempe. I put it up, and this was his answer. He says, because too many citizens don't pay direct taxes and don't feel the pinch of taxes on their pockets.
Perfect.
So corruption to them is like other people's money.
Exactly my point. We need to start looking at these things from these points of view. It's become a cultural issue. Look, why is the guy going to struggle about the time it takes for the ministry to turn around and give him some kind of tax clearance, or GRA gives him this or that or that or that? So people have decided these things, Charlie, is other people's money. And the more that happens, the more impunity we will have in those areas. Okay. Another thing you need to notice that today in Ghana, and I realized this, there's a group I belong to, and there was a discussion, and I was telling them that, look, today in Ghana, people care more about performance than they care about corruption. Okay? That's the third thing. What do I mean by that? If you need to build a road from here to the hospital, and the road is going to cost $5 million, what people want is for you to build a road. If you go and charge $10 million for the road, their problem is if you don't build a road. Their problem is not that you charge $10 million for the road.
Their problem is not that you built it today and the rains came yesterday and it's washed away.
They want performance. They want to see the hospital.
No,
so they can
I
go
don't think that is accurate.
No, hold on. I'm telling you.
Because they see the roads and these things and they complain.
No, wait.
Is it not this? They said they were spending so much money and the next day it's gone?
At this point, they want the road. As long as the road is there, they don't care how much it costs. Immediately the potholes start happening on the road, then all those issues come up. Okay. That is the same reason why if Black Stars win, we don't interrogate how much bonus they were paid and who got bonus. Okay? So get the point well. Performance is part of what you're talking about. When people see the road, they are fine. But then if the road starts developing potholes, it's a performance issue.
But Kofi, they are all linked.
Oh, they are linked, but I'm saying...
Because eventually, if you are charging 10 extra, then you won't have money to go and do the road.
You see?
And then the people will...
I am making a distinction between what people consider as affecting them and what all of us will understand. So for instance, if the $5 million road is built at 10 million. You and I will have a fit over it. But I'm saying the mass of our people care whether there's a road or there's no road.
This survey is a reality for you.
It's a reality because I've seen it for long, and I'm saying that what people respond to in this survey is what affects them. Because not everything offends them anymore. And we need to understand that. Then we can interpret these surveys properly.
Okay.
Now, the fact that let me finish on this. Let me finish.
Okay.
The fact that they are not offended by certain aspects of corruption does not mean it is not corruption.
Oh no,
that's the one that's killing us.
That's also very serious.
That's the one that's killing us.
That people are becoming sort of
immune.
You see, I want to
because we have become too used to it.
Yes,
and it's happening anyway.
We see things happening. Nothing happens to people. So people are like, Charlie, let me get on with my life.
And you know the retaliation part, which you mentioned,
where they say they are afraid.
But just to make Kofi, I agree with you exactly in terms of how this plays out to people. But that is the problem, that if you are on the government side or you are the policy maker, it catches up on you eventually. And that's exactly what happened in 2016. So by the time, when you're having problems with Dumso, you're having, so you are lacking money to do this, and then all of those things start coming back. It's because of the corruption that you couldn't do this, or that's why the road is bad, and so on and so forth. So these things catch up on you. So the public, at a moment in time, as you're right, that these things are so far removed. I remember one of the interventions we tried to do was to show people how much money the medical stores, when you put it in bags, how much money we are talking about, because people can compute.
We're still making excuses to prosecute those who are behind it.
The medical store. So you see, so the point there is that it's now time we start trying to visualize for our people the things that they don't consider important, because that's what ultimately comes back to kill all of us. Okay, but that point must be
so that piece of road they are crying for never came, or that school or hospital never happened
because somebody stole money somewhere.
That's how it went.
Yes, we need to make these connections.
Right.
And then we also need to, we are at the point in this country, we need to move from perception assessments to actually trying to get real evidence. It's time.
But you have real evidence.
Oh, hold on.
Auditor General's report.
Yeah, we have some real. It's not really real. That's why some of the prosecutions are not happening, or we are not getting the necessary, outcomes or what we are expecting.
But what role do you think, in the midst of all the positives, that should have affected? Because from where I sit, I thought that naturally, the things that had been done on the books, you've seen me do my takes on books win corruption fights. The things that have been done on the books naturally should have contributed to an improved perception, but they have not. How much do you think, these oil, dirty oil sale, these all these corruption things the president was accused of, as it were, whitewashing his people and letting them go, have influence, might have influenced this thing?
Again, so that those of us who dwell in that space understand it, and we are offended by it because we see the connections.
And you guys were doing the Kelny GVG. You still don't let go of that issue.
We don't let go, but honestly, this affected that thing. Because you get to a point where you are wondering, okay, let's get back. Now, people decide that if somebody steals $1 million at Tor, or somebody sells or contaminates fuel at Bust, and that fuel does not come into my car, but they sell it somewhere, they make the money, they split it, they share, and they go. It is corruption, but please, I have kinky and fish issues to deal with. I have bread and not butter, but bread and water issues. My kids' school fees are coming up. So they jettison those things and move on to them. And that's where now we need to connect, because you see, when the weight of the people is taken off an issue, there is no motivation for those in power to deal with the issue. But then again, you see, why do people have the view that things are getting worse? I think it has to do with expectations. And when I make the point that we now need to move from measuring or assessing perception to going to the real, the president talked about the ANAS principle. The president made a pronouncement publicly that he will use the ANAS principle. Now, we have said ANAS is not perfect, but the effect of ANAS's work, as far as I'm concerned, is more than IOCO and SFO and the special prosecutor put together. And look at how it arrests the nation. That's what one man can do. So if the president said, I will use the ANAS principle, people loved it. And there's a huge disappointment today, because we felt that the ANAS principle brings you graphic evidence. Even though it's not processed, it's not been tested in court, it brings you graphic evidence. We've seen zero of that promise. I think that's the kind of thing that will excite people and give a sense that we are doing something to fight corruption.
But why? You also mentioned there are problems with the ANAS methods, some have problems with it and so on. But you have the OSP. He's complaining about what he needs that he doesn't have. You have IOCO, who also need to be better empowered. Since they were put up, we know by the statistics that they have investigated almost 2 million cases. They have recovered a lot of money for the country. And as we speak, why not empower them? As we speak, we understand that the human resource capacity and logistics support is a major challenge to IOCO. For example, they have an establishment ceiling for 832 for the human resource. Out of that, currently they are operating with 374 personnel.
My brother, you can't tell me IOCO is less resource than ANAS.
I'm giving you the statistics.
I know the statistics, but the point is, you can choose to give a series of excuses because you don't have resources. I always say resourcefulness is more important than resources. What is IOCO in the news for right now? They're in the news for fighting AG. They are being accused of doing some whitewash issues. I'm not attacking IOCO. I'm simply saying you are dealing in the area of perception, corruption perception, and we are saying people think the government is not fighting corruption. These are the institutions supposed to be doing the work. You must do it and be seen to be doing it, because that's what governance is, and that's how perception, is formed. And don't think perception means nothing. Perception,
you and I know what goes on in Shraj.
Yes.
At the time I was leading the petition to remove the Shraj boss, that's when I discovered to my utter shock that the state had money to pay salaries, but had no money for them to operate. Money for them to operate, to do their normal work, logistics. It didn't have. It had money to pay them their salaries at the end of the month. That's Shraj. That's a giant. That's a monster sitting there. I just referred you to Article 2, 86 and 87. People could make complaints about unexplained wealth, and there's a lot of it in this country, and they will go and get these properties retrieved and monies taken for the state without going through the long process of prosecution. Yet we know Shraj, is financially, these entities are not independent.
I'm so tempted, but I won't go there. See, yes, you see, you have a situation. Well, we need to arrange or re-engineer some of these arrangements, so that what the state decides or what government decides does not affect some of these independent institutions. But again, resources are more important than resourcefulness. One of these institutions, and I have good friends in some of those places, I saw them driving a 5.7-liter V8. And I asked myself, who needs a 5.7-liter V8 riding around Accra? And then the same person comes to tell you that I don't have money to go and do this. You see, there is some room for leadership, okay, to innovate and find a way to do what they have to do. Again, what offends people is different from what affects them, okay? People now look at it and say, people are almost giving up on strike, for instance. And there are some very good people there, some of whom I know. But people are giving up on strike because it feels like nothing will come out of it and they'll still give you an excuse. All right. So back to this corruption thing.
They may have problems, but they are working though.
They do have problems,
and
they are working.
Information about what they do, then you may think that
they are working, but they need to be seen.
It's important.
The public, I totally agree with you. You see, these independent institutions must appreciate that a lot of what they do has to filter into confidence within the public, within the populace. So you can't hide behind anything and be doing your thing in silence. There must be a certain arrangement around them so that their work will be seen. It will bring people confidence. We haven't used the whistleblowers law.
Okay.
Why? Why? Because people haven't seen it. So Shraj's public hearings should be out there. You and I know, people come and sit in court and just listen to things. And some of these things, if you do them publicly, it has a way of making people believe that, something is happening. Then it moves to become something that affects them. So my point is that, well, the perception thing is good, but it's time we need to start getting beyond perception to producing something more like what a NAS principle is likely to produce. Then, and that is not
final. But I just told you, the evidence you are looking for is in the Auditor General's report every year.
The Auditor General's report.
And this is an Auditor General, for example, who is mandated to investigate and audit what comes after he comes into office. He goes back to the previous regime and investigate them. And how much did we find?
This Auditor General is the best we've had in the history of this country. It's the same problem I'm talking about. Who reads the Auditor General report apart from those of us here? And I'm talking about when you go into the public to do Afrobarometer and you're dealing with perception, you need to move from what is in the Auditor General's report into something. When a NAS does work, people troop to go and watch. So, you see, I'm saying clearly the results we are getting, the output we are getting, points to something. People have decided that what affects me is different from what offends me. So, and if I have to pay money for facilitation,
so very finally, and just a minute if you can respond to that. So from what you have clearly admitted appears to be happening, and in fact is happening, you mentioned the Auditor General and what he has done. In the midst of all of that, if this is what people's perception is of corruption today, that it is worsened, a lot worsened, then it must be that terrible that this government has not kept faith with the people, the promise that it made. It has rather worsened the situation.
So let's be clear. I don't believe that corruption is worse. But I do believe that people are extremely disappointed in this government's fight against corruption.
You don't believe that corruption is worse?
I don't. I don't have any evidence.
I ask you whether or not this is reality for you, and you answered in the affirmative. So if it is relative, if if it is,
if you give me time, I explain. No, but
why then are you saying?
So if you give me time, I explain.
You are disagreeing with the majority of Ghanaians.
The majority of Ghanaians are expressing a perception, and I told you that.
A perception informed by their encounters.
Let me make my point.
Check the report.
Yes.
A perception informed by their encounters with public institutions.
Yes, and I'm telling you that their encounters, the same people telling you that when I pay money to facilitate something done for me, that's not corruption. We need to be clear about these things so that we don't go running off. I'm saying there was a lot of expectation around this government and that it will fight corruption and be robust at it. So far, how many have we seen? It's this president that said we are going to use the ANAS principle. As we speak, ANAS is under attack by members of the same government. Okay, look at what Manasseh has done.
The security he had has been removed from him.
Yes, okay, so I'm saying that I don't have evidence that corruption has increased. We can go into that and look into that. But I clearly understand why people feel that this government has not fulfilled its promise to fight corruption.
Has it just not fulfilled or it has failed?
Well, I wouldn't say it has failed. There's still time. And nothing stops them from going around and using the ANAS principle and doing some of the things. They've done 3 years. So that is disappointing. And I agree that the expectation that we came into this government with has not been met.
Okay.
Example, the ANAS principle.
All right, so let's go around. And Sulemana, you, because of what you do in your job, not only for Ghana, but for the sub-region, training journalists to look for, where things are not being done right and report on them. When you read a survey like this one, that includes that 6 in 10 Ghanaians, that's 61%, say they are at a risk of retaliation or other negative consequences if they report incidents of corruption. What does it tell you?
Well, Samson, I think that generally I would say that the findings from the latest Afrobarometer survey in relation to corruption and what we're talking about follows a certain global pattern. If you look at other studies that have been conducted elsewhere, looking at trust for public institutions, perceptions among citizens of public institutions, you realize that across the world, and particularly in Africa, the same institutions are positioned as the Afrobarometer results reveal. We talk about the police, the judiciary, and indeed, somewhere in the Afrobarometer report, it talks about the most trusted, the most trusted being religious leaders, and elsewhere you would find traditional leaders being part of it. And in Ghana, it talks about the army. Let me also say that the results also reveal that people really follow the trends. Because if you look at the differences, over the years, what people think, whether government is doing well, government is not doing well, corruption is decreasing, corruption is increasing, and you look at the varied figures, it shows you that people really follow what is happening. And that is why, as Kojo was saying, when a new government comes in, because the expectations are so high, in terms of whether corruption has increased or reduced, you see so many people saying that it's come down. And in terms of people's perception of whether government is doing well in the fight against corruption, you see it going up. So if you look at some of the figures here, if you look at 1999, for example, which was still President Rawlings, 43% of the people saying, well, the government is doing well not doing well in corruption, versus 57% that says, well, government is doing well. Down to 2014, as Kojo was saying, the worst year, where you have 74% of the people saying we are not satisfied with what government is doing in the fight against corruption, versus 26% that says, well, we think the government is doing well. Now, again, you've related to the 2017-2019 figures, but looking at whether people are satisfied or not satisfied, because the earlier was, is it increasing or decreasing? But in terms of whether people are satisfied or not satisfied, 2017, new government, and it plummeted from 74 to 34% in terms of people who believed that the government was not doing well in the area of corruption. And then from 26% in terms of people who say, well, government is doing well, it came to 67% for 2017. So from 26% of the people saying, oh, the NDC government we think is doing well, 2017, that jumped to 67% of the people. Almost 7 out of 10 people saying, well, we think the MPP government is doing well in the fight against corruption. Then in 2-3 years down the line, that drops from 67 to 40%. You know, and suddenly that is quite worrying. And then, of course, in terms of whether it is increasing or decreasing, you have 36 and now 53. You know, and that is certainly worrying. But you were asking the question, why would people say the government is not doing well in the fight against corruption, and yet corruption doesn't appear to be the priority for them? For me, the answer is, in today's Ghana, the ordinary man knows that politics is about money making. And the way to make money is to cut corners. And indeed, I believe all of us here, friends or families may have told us one day or the other, I mean, one time or the other, but why are you not going into politics to also make some of the money and then we'll all benefit? It's a common thing. So the notion among the citizenry when it comes to politics is that politicians go in there to make money, or politics in this country has become a money-making enterprise. And therefore, why would anybody then be surprised if this classroom, 6-classroom block can be built with 100,000 and the price is 300,000? They will tell you, but why? I mean, that's normal. Every politician would make money. So the NDC was there. People think they have made their money. The MPP comes in and people say, is the time for the MPP to make it? And indeed, during the 2016 campaign, if you remember, people were saying that when we come to power, you have to take position. Take position to do what?
No contribution.
You know, no contributions, no chop. Now, so for me, that is...
So the example you just gave got me asking a question too. That we knew that at a point, the MPP in opposition could not fund its conference. It didn't have money. They were looking for, is it 1 million or so? They couldn't find the money to do it. All of a sudden, they were your biggest supporters of the yes votes, where they were going to have to fund a lot more, and they could find the money comfortably. That, for me, would give an impression that must feed into the perception index.
No, certainly. And of course, you know, we witnessed the MPP, you know, resorting to innovative ways of raising money, such as selling scratch cards, so you could find scratch cards that are branded MPP and so on and so forth. I think that as a party, they would continue to need money for elections and for other activities. You ask yourself, why has it stopped?
They don't do that anymore.
You know, so like I said,
the NDC might do so soon.
Exactly. As I said, for many people in this country, politics is about money making. So if you are in MPP, you are in power, it's your time. If you are in NDC, you are in power, it's your time. And therefore, people would say, look, forget about the corruption. As Kofi was saying, what would need, you know, would be the roads, the hospitals, and so on and so forth. And for corruption, they are all corrupt, and they do it all the time, provided they get the opportunity. But why would you know, over a 2-year period, Ghanaians who thought that, look, they had confidence in the MPP in terms of the fight against corruption, the government would do so well, and so on and so forth, and just within 2 years, the figures are changing. And for me, I've listed here about 6 or 7 reasons that I think would account for, you know, the dwindling confidence in the government's abilities towards the fight against corruption. 1, somebody mentioned Wyoming. Wyoming was a big thing, a big campaign issue. You know, and people had the expectation that, well, one of the things that Ghanaians will benefit from is the retrieval of the Wyoming money once we get the MPP into power. Today, what are we witnessing? It's a fight between Martin Amidu and the AG on the same Wyoming money. The Supreme Court says what? Well, you need to... Well, but the struggle towards retrieving the money, you know, Martin obviously went to court as, you know, as an individual to file against Wyoming. There was judgment that the money must be retrieved. Today, what are we witnessing? Martin must provide whatever to the AG to support the retrieval of the money. In court, what are we witnessing? Literally, the last time, as I read, I'm not a lawyer, I may be wrong, but it was Dame versus Martin. What was it about? I think it was on issues related to still the retrieval of the Wyoming money and whether evidence that was provided by Martin was sufficient to help the AG to retrieve the money or not.
It doesn't look good.
Yeah? So that for me is one thing.
But clearly in that matter, the court or the state is not fighting Martin Amidu.
Well,
it just doesn't look good.
They are not.
He's a bit impatient, like you and I. He's a bit impatient, seeking to push the state, but he doesn't give what it takes to hurry in the manner he's asking.
No, but
so the court says, if you have anything, assist the state with it, rather than coming back to us and seeking to say, you got the judgment, so...
You see, Samson, if you take the legal route, I can understand that.
You're right.
But for the ordinary man, the expectation wasn't that when the MPP gets to power, it was Martin Amidu. Yes, certainly, absolutely. For the ordinary man, the expectation wasn't that when Martin Amidu when MPP gets to power, it will take another effort on the part of Martin Amidu to even get the money. You know, so today, if we now have to deploy these legalese and so on and so forth, so
it's not exactly the reality.
So I'm relating to you some of the factors that may have gotten people to have that reduced, you know, perception about the government's effort in the fight against corruption. The second point is, you know, the MPP promised, if you read page 53 or so of the MPP manifesto, that it will establish a mechanism to ensure automatic transfers of statutory funds such as the NHIS, the Common Fund, and so on and so forth, you know, directly to the agencies that must benefit from them. You ask yourself, is it happening? In fact, during the referendum debate, one of the strongest arguments of the yes voters was that it would ensure transparency and accountability down there. And in fact, when the president delivered his address to cancel it, he talked about the fact that one of the reasons was to ensure accountability at the local level. And you ask yourself, is it the case that there is no accountability there? Is it that the president is also acknowledging
we'll get there.
That there is no accountability
we'll get to
in
that
there?
Subject.
And so that certainly is another issue. The other point is, look, Ghanaians are concerned about contract prices and who the beneficiaries are of the contracts. So under NDC 2014, you would have, you know, 74% of the people saying, look, the government is not doing well, because we see party chairmen, party secretaries, constituency organizers, constituency chairmen being the beneficiaries of the contracts. And the contracts are being awarded at figures that we all know, we all build. You know, a 6 classroom block should not cost us this amount of money. And yet it goes to the party chairman or party organizer, and this is the amount, and it's still happening.
So the question I ask again, why is the perception this high in a regime that has done quite a lot on paper? This reference you just made, you know, we have done what we call beneficial ownership. So now our laws allow us to go behind to check who is that company you have given the contract to. Is it really that company without some politician behind it? All this is happening, and yet you have this rate of mistrust.
Well, the reason is what I was directly coming to, which is laws without implementation. And I think that this government, if there is one area we have to applaud it, is in the, you know, getting us new laws. You know, the Office of the Special Prosecutor law, difficult as it was navigated because there was this issue about whether the president can, you know, appoint somebody like that, because the Constitution says the Attorney General has the power, and they were able to navigate it where the Attorney General would play a role in getting the person in place. The president will play a role. Done in record time. And so, yes, done in record time. And after it, we all applauded. You know, when the president appointed Martin Amidu, we thought, look, this is just really going to be a massive thing. 2 years on, people are so disappointed. Is that all that we were expecting? Is there
justification for that disappointment? Is it impatience?
Well, I don't think it is a matter of impatience. Yes, sometimes you can say, well, people must be patient. But 2 years on, what are we seeing? They are in court fighting 34,000.
The government has failed in this direction.
34,000 CDs. Because to the extent that Martin, for example, complains in terms of his setup, the resources he needs, the personnel he needs, why go through all these difficult processes of navigating to have the office established?
But he was given only for 180 million.
Well, but
he's been allotted money.
Kofi, allotment, as you know,
I'm not playing the No. It's important to get the issues right.
Okay. So you are saying, in your view, it has failed.
I mean, in my view and in my expectation, I don't see what I was expecting in terms of the Office of the Special Prosecutor, and in fact, even the deterrence that it would have
I beg you
put in
something,
place.
just a quick one.
Okay.
We are not seeing that.
Let me go to
If you let me just,
We are conflicting government and the office of the special prosecutor.
No, but you see, we talk. What is government, Kofi? What is government?
That's why OSP is independent. It should even go after government.
No, but if we're talking about state institutions, are you saying that, for example, if Amidu, no, are you saying that if Amidu by now, had succeeded in prosecuting some 10 people.
Nobody has stopped him.
No. State rather than
I have a problem with that because nobody has stopped him. I wish he would do more. You and I know how much we fought over this OSP. So please, it's clear.
No, the point is, if we're talking about the fight
you finish up in a minute,
corruption,
and let me go to
and now there are other reasons. For example, the current issue around the Auditor General. Who are the people, instigating this whole issues around the Auditor General? Either must go, must face prosecution, must face investigation, and so on and so forth. Something you know.
I don't know. I know about the suspicion. I don't know. I know about the suspicion.
Who petitioned Iyoko? Which media outlets, were being used, as a scheme to really front that whole agenda? We all know. And of course, I think that the phenomenon where
we know the petitioner, but we don't know him to belong to
in the previous periods where we would have an issue come up, and even before state agencies will complete their investigations.
Sorry, you know the petitioner to be in a party?
No, I'm saying that if you're a party member, doesn't mean that you can petition.
Right.
Yes.
No, absolutely.
When you look at
right, thank you.
No, I'm saying that.
Yes.
I'm saying that phenomenon where state institutions will be investigating a matter, and then the president comes out to pronounce, his view or verdict on it. So I'm just looking at what could be the possible issues.
In just a minute, the small bit of the part of the question I ask you, which for me is also important, is where you have as many as 61% of the respondents saying that they are scared, they are afraid to blow the whistle on corruption, because if they did, there will be some retaliation or some form of attack, if you like, on them. What does that tell you of the situation?
You see, Samson, I think that if we put the analysis I'm making in context, I'm basically looking at what could have been the triggers, the factors that would have prompted people to have a different view of the government's effort in the fight against corruption. So I'm trying to just give you a number of things.
I'm asking of your interpretation of that bit of the data, because I am thinking that everybody should feel bold that when they do this, they even have the support of the state.
In law.
Yes, they have the support of the state, but they are scared. They don't want to.
No, but they should. If you take
compare them to the perceived corruption in those institutions.
But they should. I mean, let's take the example of our own colleague friend Manasseh, who had taken it upon himself to do a lot of investigative issues around procurement, and so on and so forth. He's had to go through a lot of troubles. As you know, the last time I met him, this about 1 week ago, but before then I knew he used to work with a policeman.
He still does.
He still does. I mean, why? Why so?
And he just finished with the procurement thing and disclosed.
Yes.
And brought the revelation that the man at the helm of procurement himself was procuring for himself.
Yes.
So he cannot be secured, really.
And Kofi was talking about Anas, and the work he does. It's public that I have issues, with some of the methods that Anas has been deploying, in recent times. But whatever it is, and my problem is positioning that as journalistic. If it was a different way of doing it and exposing what is being exposed, I have no problem. But whatever it is, at the end of the day,
we knew that the state, by the promise of Akufo-Addo, he was going to collaborate with Anas. Elsewhere in the world, they use these guys to do what you call the agent provocateur. Yeah. The state backs them, and then they bring the results.
Yes.
So why is that not happening?
Yes. Wow.
Why is it that instead, the level of the security he had is almost completely wiped off, and he has to be on his own.
So that is the response to why 6 out of 10 people would say, I fear retaliation, if I dare report, corruption in an institution or against someone. Because those who are doing it, people are witnessing. People are seeing what challenges they are going through.
Yeah.
So for me, I'm not surprised at all that this will be the verdict of the people in terms of the perceptions they have when it comes to government's effort towards the fight against corruption.
Okay, thank you. So now let's go to Kwaku Baako and hear your interpretation or appreciation of the Afrobarometer report. But I'd like to read this this quotation from Ken Ajiman Atefa's, book, and the Attorney General quoted it this week.
Which one?
When corruption and the challenges of national development. Okay. He says that the cost of corruption is enormous, covering the loss of development funds, retardation of economic growth, flight of capital, and the inflation of administrative cost. Corruption also frequently results in loss of legitimacy. That's how dire it can be. And respect for legally constituted authority by, among other things, undermining the integrity of the social-legal foundations of that authority. It debases the moral fiber of a society by nibbling away at the core values that bond the society together. Corruption is decidedly dysfunctional to the maintenance of a just social order. It is heavy damper on motivation. It stifles initiative and creativity, demoralizes the honest person, violates the individual's right to economic and social well-being. It nourishes mediocrity and undermines the merit system of rewards, appointments, and entitlements. Corruption generates incompetence by fostering the appointment of the proverbial square pegs in round holes. Corruption engenders market inefficiencies and fosters the deliberate creation of bottlenecks in the bureaucracy in order to further the ends of exploitation. In short, corruption is a hindrance to economic development and social advancement. Let's situate this in the report.
Yes, but we should clarify or clear certain issues. In terms of the Anas principle, and I'm not sure if I was wrong, Kofi can quickly correct me, because I got the impression that the principle or the processes have not been tested in terms of its methods and things.
No, that's not what I meant. Rather, it's been tested, and the president said he will use it.
Yes, because some of the things he's done went to court and got vindicated.
Produced results, that's right.
Okay, what I was saying is that not all the evidence he's collected has been processed through court.
Okay. All right.
But some have.
Yes, some have.
Yes,
and,
okay.
And,
So
for
let's
instance,
go.
the cocoa smuggling, the SEPS thing.
There's a lot of it.
So the principle is well established.
Yeah, I just wanted to get that clear. And then the way you make thing, I think we should just bring some clarity on the matter. Woyomi's case is virtually concluded. Indeed, December 2nd Daily Graphic, just few days ago, there was an auction, a publication of his, to auction his properties. In a democracy, Woyomi capitalized on the democratic provisions that were available to him to fight consistently. We all saw it, even when beyond our boundaries. So July 2019, the Supreme Court gave a final ruling. So it wasn't as if somebody was sleeping on the job. The man was fighting. He's a fighter and using the law. And the law had to be used.
No, but you see, when you stand on a campaign platform and you give the people a sort of hope that you will do this in a certain rapid fashion, and that there is inertia on the part of a particular regime because it is corrupt.
No.
And then when you come and you face the same bottlenecks,
you have no case.
The people have the right.
Some saying you have no case.
They are justified.
Let's say you have no case. Did they say they will use Gestapo methods to retrieve the money? We're going to apply military force to take the money? Nobody said that. Nobody said that. So
President Mahama had wished that.
He said so. He said that he would have, if he was a military leader, he would have retrieved the money just like that. But we know he didn't mean it. He was talking in a certain context.
That would have been wrong.
Yes. Okay. So processes have been done. And eventually the Supreme Court gave a final ruling based on which his properties have been auctioned. I'm saying 2nd December Daily Graphic. It's there.
Kweku, from where I sit, I can see the commendable efforts, legal processes. But I'm saying that when you stand on a political campaign platform and you tell the people that a government was somehow complicit and was not interested, and that you will do it like with the stroke of the pen once you come into office, and then you come into office and we have spent 3 years and you are still chasing it, you have not gotten a dime out of it.
You are looking at
you
are talking of the political angle. And I'll tell you, when the politician says that he's not bothered about who caused the liability, who caused the liability, okay, he's interested. He's not interested in the beneficiary rather, but who caused the liability. Do you recall it?
President Mills.
Yes.
What did that mean? Straight away, it gave a perception that some attempt is being made to protect the beneficiary.
Okay, so can you proceed
through
to
the thing into a political
Can you proceed to Afrobarometer?
So no, but it's important we clear. So the way you're making is
it's only a difference of opinion.
No.
And I think that
it shouldn't be. It shouldn't be for argument's sake.
Yes, and I think that
really,
it's important we look at that in the context of, could that feed into a perception for somebody to think that, oh, this government or party is not doing well?
That's a question.
But we are sitting here,
we are looking at it.
We are debating and analyzing. Can we demystify that?
So that's a legitimate position.
No, but can't it be demystified when we sit here?
If we have facts.
Are we supposed to just go along?
Proceed, Kweku.
I'm saying that is distinct also from the Waterville case, where there are also cross-border jurisdictional issues that have come on board. So let's draw that distinction. Right now, the controversy between Martin and the state, if you like, is relative to the Waterville matter.
That's right,
How to deal with the Waterville issue, not Woyome. Woyome is out of the way. That's the point I'm making. Now, you see, Afrobarometer is a very credible institution in terms of its work. Its local branch that does the work, CDD, and I'm not saying it because Kojo is sitting here, it's a very credible agency. Their research surveys that they put out there, the findings are hugely credible in my candid opinion. We've had situations in this country where political parties and politicians, when the findings do not suit them, attack the integrity and credibility of both the Afrobarometer and the CDD. I'm beginning to see a certain new trend. The trend, and I think it's good for this country, where those who previously were seriously against these surveys are coming on board and accepting that it has integrity. Indeed, even the NPP that has had the habit of always embracing it with some reservations, at one stage actually had a problem. You remember President Kufuor, the 2005 version, had problems because he said there was no corruption in his government, whereas the survey was pointing to some corruption, and it became a huge issue. But I think gradually, there's a broad consensus coming that, look, let's accept these findings in good faith, based on their face value, and use it to re-engineer our society. I think that's good for us. I got this copy through this mentality of Kojo, not about a day or two ago, so I haven't bothered to do very serious analysis. But I'm not about for a moment to discount the validity of the findings here. Look, we've set up an office of, and when I say we, I don't mean, and I mean the state. I set up an office for special prosecutor. This Auditor General, you said is the best. I think he's the most activist that we have had. I prefer that description. His output is showing, fortunately based on the Supreme Court verdict relative to the Occupy Ghana thing. You check all his findings, it's good enough for us. Some investigations have been conducted, go to Parliament, cash for seat. We saw it in the open. Those who made allegations were given the opportunity to bring evidence. We all know what happened. The verdict went against the allegers. We saw a Ajako bribery allegation that was also done in the open. We saw A+ allegation against 2 deputy chiefs of staff. It was investigated by the CID. There were problems, some discrepancies. Some people petitioned the SHRAJ. SHRAJ investigations and findings vindicated the CID report. You know, we've had the Manasseh PPA thing, and Manasseh's problem, I don't think has something to do with the procurement investigation. It was a militia documentary. If I'm wrong, you can correct me.
Right.
Yes, so that's different. The PPA boss has been asked to step aside. I think the case has been referred to SHRAJ. SHRAJ is...
OSP started the investigation on it.
Yeah,
they have been reporting to
The
OSP.
conflict of interest went to SHRAJ.
Exactly, because of the law, because of the Supreme Court ruling relative to the Anani case. But it is ongoing. The boss thing was investigated. The interministerial committee report is out, not publicly. I have seen a copy. I think the most important thing that happened to that case was that boss itself set up an internal committee, and they investigated. The findings are adverse. It's from 2014 to 2018. Disaster. Now, the point really is this. In spite of all these things that I've mentioned, it is obvious that it's not sufficient to reverse the perception of corruption. It's obvious. What it means is that we need to do more than we are doing at this stage. So for me, what government ought to be doing is to take this report, study it, find the missing links. For instance, prosecutions, you see, you take the Office of Special Prosecutor. I think they've gone beyond the area where it's logistical constraints. Many of their logistical constraints have been addressed, as far as I know. So they've gone beyond that. I'm not too sure what is stopping the Office of the Special Prosecutor dealing with certain issues. Charles Bishop's case, for instance. The CID intruded. Some of us were opposed to that intrusion because the Special Prosecutor was already seized with it. Now, what is the status of that case? I cannot imagine, I cannot see anybody in government or in the state that can actually prevent the Office of the Special Prosecutor from proceeding with that particular case. I cannot imagine. Honestly, I don't see any obstacle that will confront the office from dealing with that case. So perhaps in asking the question, instead of asking government, we have to be asking the Office of the Special Prosecutor. And he has to be transparent and tell us that these are my difficulties. If the case has no merit...
What are you saying? The Afrobarometer survey results, is it your reality?
To a large extent, it reflects the reality, even though it's based on perception. But let's be honest. Look, go back from the 1999, and I brought most of them here. It's almost consistent. Yes. So there is something wrong.
That is my worry. That is,
yes.
That is what worries me the most.
It's like the Auditor General's reports. Look, I've been doing a study from 1965 to today. Sometimes it's word for word. What has changed is the quantum of the losses. There is a systemic failure. It goes beyond individual administrations. That does not purge individual administrations of the liability or responsibility. Because you are giving power to use to change, to reform. So when I say so, I'm not purging any administration, especially this one, because it is the one that is incumbent. So the focus ought to be on them. But there is something basically wrong with the kind of system we run.
Yeah.
I mean,
structurally. But has this administration lived up to its campaign promises in fighting corruption for you?
I didn't expect this administration to fulfill its campaign promise relative to corruption within a 4-year term. I didn't expect it.
Oh, but they were coming into office for 4 years. Is that not so?
No, but I'm saying no government can do that.
When you have voted, when you go to the elections, you are campaigning for 4 years.
You cannot eradicate corruption within 4 years in its totality. That's what I mean. I expect them to do something. I expect them to show signs that will build confidence.
But when they were promising, they wouldn't tell anybody that we are promising that if you give us 8 years, when they were looking for 4 years.
No, I didn't say that. If for 8 years, you will not be successful. So that's the point I was making from a broad perspective. That's where Kufuor was coming from when he said corruption started from Adam.
No, but
he wasn't saying that.
But I doubt they promised they were going to eradicate corruption, and I doubt that is your
fight
answer.
corruption.
It's about whether what they promised to do, you know,
but they can point to the legislative instruments.
That is where,
like the creation of the Office of Special Prosecutor. They can point to that. Yeah. Indeed, perhaps if you go and check the budget, they will tell you that, look, we've increased financial outlay to the anti-corruption agencies, and if you are doing a comparative analysis, the increment is there as compared to previous ones. They'll point to these things. All these are efforts. Okay, the RTI bill, which is an act now, yet to be operationalized. They'll point to that. But I'm saying that all this put together, clearly against the backdrop of the survey, shows that they are insufficient relative to enforcement, prosecution. We should all admit that. I'm not in government, but the government should be the first to admit that this is a wake-up call, that perhaps we haven't been doing sufficiently enough to deal with the canker. That's the point, the approach they should take, rather than dismiss the whole thing outright.
No, I don't think they have done so.
No, I'm not saying this government.
If you check the information ministry, they seem to have a template they are following. When reports come out, they are not in a hurry to rubbish them. They accept, and then they point out what they think is not correct.
That has been the character of the NPP, whether in government or opposition, except with that one I gave, the one Kufuor.
I think now more consistent than before.
Yes, but that's the point I'm making. So when I made that point about don't dismiss, I wasn't referring particularly to this administration or what they have said relative to this. I was making the general case that our attitude as a people and as a government should be to accept this survey and its findings in good faith and work to address the issues.
And something, I just wanted to add that, I mean, the point that Kwesi made, Kokubaku made about the systemic problem that we have. Because you see, anybody that does research, when you see this trend, it's basically, it doesn't move.
It doesn't move. It's worrying.
I mean, once you have stagnation, you have reversal.
You are in trouble
at some point.
Very serious.
And one of the things that everybody can admit here, that it is normalizing.
That's what I'm saying.
People see,
there's a cultural
people are getting immune.
That's very dangerous.
They are getting immune.
It's normalizing.
Immune to the violence of corruption, right? Because they stop the connections. You know, as you're saying, the word offense and, you know.
Okay, so we'll take a break and I come back to ask you briefly about what we can do to avoid the dangerous normalization. You know, looked against the background of Professor Tefe's, you know, quotation that I read to you.
Description.
This is serious. We'll be right back.